All right, class, so we're closing out part one, the ancient Middle East, circa 3500 BCE to 600 CE. The Romans. Rome was a wealthy, complex society. However, warfare led to social strife. In the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire fell. Roman dress was similar to Greek forms of dress, but it included elements that announced the status of the wearer. In the imperial period, only men were citizens. Across the citizens were varied classes, either men being rich, middle class, or poor. However, citizenship is what distinguished one man from another. Citizenship was marked by the toga, which only citizens could wear. Roman attire was simple. It was the styles of clothing and the fabric used that associated people with rank, age, ethnicity, class, and gender. Married women were stolas. When their husbands became the oldest member of the family, the woman would style her hair in a tutulus. Widows were required to wear dark, squared cloaks for a minimum of 1 year after their husband's death. Upper class men belonged to one of the civil and military orders. Senators were the most important and were distinguished by their dress in the Republican times. Their tunic had vertical, broad purple bands called clavi that ran from the hem to the shoulder. They wore shoes that laced halfway up the leg to the knee. The second most important were the knights. The knights wore tunics with slightly narrower purple bands. Their attire also had a gold ring signifying their rank. After the 1st century BCE, it was custom for all noble men to wear the clavi on their tunic. Fabrics and clothing production. During the time of the Roman Republic, various types of fabrics and ready made garments were available. Cotton was often mixed with linen to give a better drape and a more luxurious surface. Cotton was also mixed with wool. Due to the cost of silk, it was often mixed with linen and other fibers. Roman costume for men and women. In the middle of the 1st century, laws were passed that restricted the use of the toga to male Roman citizens. Earlier, the toga was preserved for free-born boys and girls who wore togas with purple borders until they reached a certain age. Girls' puberty and boys between 14 to 16 years old, at which point they wore white toga, virilized. In the early period, the toga was draped from a length of white wool fabric, roughly semicircular in shape, with a band of color around the curved edge. In the imperial period, the shape of the toga had changed. Its draping became more elaborate. Two new features, the sinus and the umbo, were added. The sinus formed an overfold. The overfold was rolled into loose folds across the back of the body. The folds loosened as they came from under the right arm, which caused the overfold to fall almost to the knee. The umbo was a decorative piece which may have helped to hold the toga together. Roman costume, 500 BCE to 400 CE. Costume components for men. Tunics were worn as underclothing or sleepwear for upper class men. Poor men wore belted tunics when in public. There were many different variations of the tunic, including tunics that were cut shorter in the front rather than the back, and shorter versions of the tunic were worn for manual laborers and military. Cloaks and capes were also worn as outerwear. So here's a few of the most important cloaks. The painula, which was a heavy wool cloak with a semicircular shape. It closed at the front and had a hood. The lacerna was a rectangular shaped cloak with rounded corners and a hood. The lina was a circular shaped piece of cloth folded to a semicircle that was thrown over the shoulders and pinned at the front. The beres resembled a modern day hooded poncho. It had a full cut and had an opening through which the head was slipped. The paludamentum was a large white or purple cloak similar to the Greek chlamys. Costume components for women. Roman women dress was similar to that of Greek women, consisting of undergarments, several layers of tunics, and outer mantles. Undergarments included loincloth, also known as a sublagaria, and a band of fabric called the strophum that supported the breast, much like a bantu top. Floor-length tunics were the basic garment for Roman women. A draped shawl called the palla was placed over the tunic. Garments designating social status for women. Specific garments were associated with women of particular status. The stola was reserved for the free, married woman. The palla covered the head when outdoors. The vita was a woolen band used to bind the hair. The tutulus was only worn by maiders. This special type of hairstyle was created by pulling the hair atop of the head and wrapping it in a cloth. The rincinum was worn by widows during mourning. This was a small mantle that was used as a head covering. The toga was worn by women who committed adultery, as they no longer were permitted to wear the stola or the vita. Costume components for men and women. In the Republic period, men wore beards. However, in the Empire period, they had a clean shaven face. Their hair was cut short and arranged by a barber. The first shave for men was considered a rite of passage. The shaven hair was placed in a special container and sacrificed to the gods. During the Republic period, women wore their hair in soft waves. Towards the end of the period, though, the styles became a bit more complex and were created from curls, braids, and hair extensions. In the later Empire period, simple braids or locks that were doubled and pinned atop of the head were styles that women wore. Footwear, both men and women wore sandals, boots, and slipper-like shoes. Women carried fans and handbags. Both men and women wore wide hats and parasols. White linen handkerchiefs served different functions. When carried, they were either serving the purpose of a sudarum, which is for wiping off perspiration, veiling the face, or to protect against disease by holding it up against the mouth. As an orarium, which was a slightly larger version of the sudarium, which was a symbol of rank, it was carried by women of upper class. The mappa was a table napkin that guests would bring along to dinner parties. Expensive rings, bracelets, necklaces, armlets, earrings, and diadems were worn by women. Men only wore rings. Both men and women lavishly used cosmetics. Perfume were used by both men and women. Women whitened their skin, tinted their lips, and darkened their eyebrows. Men who were conscious about their appearance would wear makeup. Costume components for children. After puberty, girls no longer wore the toga praetexta. They may have worn the siparum, which was a belted lip. Infants were swaddled. When a freeborn boy was named, a bulla, which is a locket made of gold, silver, bronze, or leather, and contained charms against the evil eye, was placed around the infant's neck. This was worn until adulthood. Girls wore their hair braided and tied with a single woolen band. Costume for specialized occupations and occasions, military dress. The body armor of soldiers was worn over their tunics as a distinctive element of dress, made from leather bands, from corselets of metal plates, or from discs mounted on fabric or leather. Greaves were worn to protect the legs. Distinctions of military rank were also made via dress. Officers wore the abola, which was a folded rectangular piece of fabric that was fastened on the right shoulder. The sagum was a single layer of thick wool, generally in the color red. Costume for specialized occupations and occasions, dinner parties. A synthesis was a lightweight garment that was worn for dining because the toga was too heavy to eat comfortably in. This garment was never seen outside the home except during one particular special occasion called the Saturnalia. Costume for specialized occupations and occasions, wedding dress. The Romans set the standard for some of today's traditional wedding dress elements, such as the veil and orange blossoms. Traditionally, woven tunics were worn with a knotted belt of wool and a palla and matching shoes. Hair was styled with 6 pads of hair extensions, which were separated by narrow bands. A veil of bright orange flammeum was placed over the hair. On top of the veil was a wreath of myrtle and orange blossoms. Costume for specialized occupations and occasions, religious dress. There was very little difference in the religious garb from the costume of ordinary people. However, Vestal virgins wore veils that fastened under their chin, along with 6 pads of hair extensions separated by bands, much like that worn of brides. This ties up part 1.